Hello, Professor, and my dear friends. Today I am here to give a presentation on two-factor authentication in banking sectors. For this authentication, it can be defined as a process of verifying the identity of a user, and the most common technique used to authenticate a user is by identifying their username and passwords. Coming to authentication factors, there are three different kinds of factors, and they are as follows. What you have, for example, this can be a phone or a hard drive. What you know, it can be a password or a PIN. What you are, it can be your fingerprints or your retina. Moving on to two-factor authentication. Two-factor authentication is a security process in which the user provides two means of identifications, one of which is typically a physical token such as a card, and the other of which is typically something memorized such as security code. Two-factor means utilizing of two classes together. It can be a hardware token plus a password, or it can be a fingerprint and a pen, or either it can be a retina scan plus a phone. How the two-factor authentication works. When an authentication is needed, when you give your user ID and password, and if the factors are correct, it asks you for the second factor required. It might be a code that has been sent to your mobile phone. When you enter the code, it checks if the second factor is correct or if the authentication is correct or not. Access is only accepted if the second factor authentication has been accepted and is been correct. And later it asks whether to save the enrollment information or not. If the users have not enrolled, it goes through an access challenge and a challenge response, and the enrollment for the second factor is done. When the user accepts the second factor, it finally asks for an enrollment save option again. Or if the second factor authentication is denied, then your uh, your access to the your access to uh, the online banking or to your to your account is denied. Moving on to the next slide, tokens. Tokens are nothing but a one-time password authentication product used which is highly secure, ensuring that only the authorized users with an authorized access can actually access to the critical applications and data, that is mobile banking and financial transactions. And hardware tokens. These tokens generate a number every 60 seconds that is usually based on either a priority algorithm or HOTP most commonly. And you can see different kinds of tokens in the slides below. They are as follows: hard tokens, USB tokens, smart cards, soft tokens, mobile token. Two-factor authentication in banking sector. The two-factor authentication plays a vital role in protecting online accounts. After half logging in with the user ID and password, a site offering two-factor authentication sends you a text message with a one-time code on it, as we discussed before. You are not fully logged in until you enter this one-time code, proving that your mobile phone is with you. It's very important when we are talking about accessing to your finance. And here are a few banks which have an extra layer of security when logging into your online banking. And the banks are as follows. They are Ale, Bank of America, Citibank, Chase, Discover, HSBC. All these banks use two-factor authentication, which makes the online banking more secure. Moving in depth and considering JP Morgan as real-time example, JP Morgan Chase uses two-factor authentication, giving only your user ID and password alone is not sufficient to log into your systems. But unfortunately, this bank had issues with 90 of its servers, It didn't have the two-factor authentication enabled, and it allowed uh, logging into the system with just a username and password alone. This weak point in the bank defenses was enough for a hacker to break in and have access to more than 90 servers. Having access to all the critical and sensitive information like account details, loan details, transaction, credit card transactions, and all, except and all. After the post incident, JP Morgan has announced to enhance its security measures by end of year by releasing a funds of amount 250 million only spent on to improve its two-factor authentication and make make the online transaction more secure. Moving on to the last slide, that is implementation of two-factor authentication for remote access to financial resources or banking have major benefits like increases the level of security for authentication process and also reduction of likelihood of data breaches when compared to single factor authentication process, even the cost reductions of the software implementation, and majority of the solutions are easy to integrate with existing architecture. And finally, the concerns need to have your mobile phone or tokens for two-factor authentication with you all the times. People often get sick of having that extra bit of typing to do and eventually disable two-factor authentication, which leads to imbalance in security. Moving on to the last slide, that is references. And these are the references through which I got all this information. And please feel free to leave comments if you have any doubts about this two-factor authentication in banking sectors. Thank you.